On a typical Sunday morning, these pews right here are occupied with the precious young people of the Forest Hill Church of Christ, and they're precious indeed, as well as every pew occupied by every soul here today is. But I must confess that it's very encouraging to see the balconies full of the church of today and the church of tomorrow. And at a time when we see a lot of things happening in our country that are discouraging, and some encouraging news this week, as has already been noted and prayed about, it's also very encouraging to see that we still have young people who love God enough and love His Word enough to want to spend a week of their lives coming together and studying that Word. Isn't that encouraging? Doesn't that give us something about which to rejoice? And so we're excited to be here. The staff also that we have is phenomenal. And these men and women have traveled from long distances just because they love young people and they love souls. And we're so grateful for their presence. Pray for us this week. Our theme is Rejoice in the Lord. But what is the shortest verse in the English New Testament? I'm sure you're aware of the fact, most of you indeed are aware of the fact that the shortest verse in our English Bible is John chapter 11 and verse 35, where the Bible simply says, Jesus wept. Now, of course, not as many people would be aware of the shortest verse in the Greek New Testament because most of us don't carry Greek New Testaments with us to services. But some are able to read these words and translate them. What is the translation of the Greek phrase on the screen? This is not John 11:35. It is the shortest verse in the Greek New Testament. It is rejoice evermore. The shortest verse in our English Bible is about weeping. The shortest verse in the Greek New Testament is about rejoicing. And if you really stop and think about it, as you look back over your life, are there moments of great joy that stand out and also moments of great sorrow? And the Bible covers both bases. Jesus wept, but Jesus also did something else, and we're going to see that in just a moment. But this phrase, rejoice evermore, is very much akin to this one you've certainly heard of and quoted and sang perhaps. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. This is Philippians chapter 4 and verse number 4. And I don't want to get complicated today. There's no need to get complicated today. We're going to take these verses and just do a simple 4-question analysis of this verse in particular. We're going to look, first of all, at what it is this passage is asking us to do, where we are to do it, how often we are to do it, and how we are to do it. And so let's start with the what. What should we do based on Philippians chapter 4 and verse 4? We should rejoice. Now, this is very characteristic of our Lord. In John the 15th chapter in verse number 11, Jesus is talking to his apostles there in the upper room. And he tells them, he said, these things have I spoken unto you. Why, Jesus, did you speak these things? And the first thing I'd like you to notice from this text is what Jesus said about his own condition. He said, my joy. Do you picture Jesus as a joyful person? Or someone that was always somber in expression and walked around so piously that he never could smile and never could enjoy life, and he was just always looking out to find something to condemn? That's not the Jesus of the Bible. Jesus was certainly strict when he needed to be. He was firm when he needed to be. He was serious when he needed to be, but he was also joyful. He says, I want my joy. Yes, Jesus was joyful. But notice the second things from this text. He says, I want my joy to not just get into you. He tells the apostles, I want my joy to get there and stay there. He said, I want it to remain in you. It's easy to be joyful for a day or two perhaps, but the challenge is to have it get there and abide there. That's what Jesus wants. And here's the third thing he said to his apostles: I want your joy to be what? How much joy are you wanting your followers to have, Jesus? He said, I want it to be full. It's the concept of bubbling over or overflowing. Now, someone might say, well, wait a minute, that's just to the apostles. No. One of the apostles who heard this stated that night and wrote it down in the Gospel of John also wrote an epistle, 1 John. And I love 1 John because you don't have to wonder what this book is about. He comes right out and tells you throughout, here's why I'm writing this. This is why I'm writing this. And right out of the gate, here's what 1 John 1 and verse 4 says: these things write we unto you. John, why did you write this thing? Why did you write these things? That your joy might be full. Now, where had he ever heard that before? That's the very thing Jesus had said to him on the night that we read about John 15 and verse 11 taking place. And so, yes, joy is to be yours, it's to be mine, and Jesus wants us to get it, to maintain it, and to have it growing and increasing. Now, where can this joy be found? Where can true joy be found? The passage doesn't just say rejoice, it tells you where you can find that true joy. Rejoice in the Lord. Yes, indeed. Did you know that Philippians 4:4 is not the only time you see these words in this kind of combination? In fact, in the book of Psalms, in Psalm number 32 and verse number 11, look at the phrase, be glad in the Lord. And rejoice, he says, ye righteous. And then notice the third thing, shout for joy. Three things right here out of the gate in this text that jump off the page or pop off the screen at you. You'll notice number one, be glad. Where can you be glad? Be glad in the Lord. Number two, he says rejoice. And number three, he says shout for joy. This is not just a timid, better felt than told sort of feeling. It is actually something that you feel so strongly about that you would shout it out if needed. Indeed, be glad in the Lord, rejoice and shout for joy. But now I want you to stay in the same text and notice the connection between rejoicing and righteousness. Who is it that can be glad in the Lord? Who is it that can rejoice and shout for joy? Notice, ye righteous, which is parallel to the phrase later in the verse, upright in heart. That's where true joy is found, not in living unrighteous lives to pursue our own selfish desires. True joy is found in being righteous. Here's another text that says the same thing, has the same combination. You'll notice Psalm 33:1, rejoice where? In the Lord. Who can do that? O ye righteous. Those who live after righteousness are pursuing joy, true joy. In fact, in Psalm 35 and verse 9, the psalmist would say, my soul shall be joyful in my iPhone. Oh, wait a minute, that's not what this text says, is it? My soul shall be joyful in my game box, my Xbox. You can tell I don't play much anymore. The PlayStation, whatever you want to put in that blank. My soul shall be joyful in my favorite movie, my favorite concert, Look, those things are not wrong to enjoy in and of themselves, but those aren't the ultimate expressions of joy. Rejoicing in salvation is what this life is really all about. I love Psalm 64:10. The righteous, notice again the connection, the righteous shall be glad in the Lord. So gladness is found where? It's found not in stuff. It's not found in fame. It's not found in fortune. It's found where? It's found in the Lord. And it's the righteous, the upright in heart, that are truly able to have this gladness. I love Psalm 97 and verse 12. Rejoice in the Lord. Do you see a connection here? A pattern? Rejoice in the Lord. Different verse, same theme. You righteous. So if you're not happy today, let me just ask you, and I'm not talking about joy is not the absence of all grief, as I'm going to show you here in just a few moments from the scriptures. But if you're not truly joyful today, might it be that you're trying to look for that in all of the wrong places, as one of the classes is going to be entitled this week, Rejoice in the Lord, ye righteous. And then I will be glad. Where are you going to find gladness? I'll be glad in the Lord. What makes you glad? It's the Lord who makes me glad. Psalm 104 and verse 34. What about the prophets? The prophet Isaiah shows that joy is an increasing thing. The meek shall increase their joy in the Lord, and the poor among men shall rejoice in the Holy One of Israel. And then Isaiah 41:16 has that phrase, rejoice in the Lord. Now we might be thinking rejoice in the Lord is only found really in Philippians 4:4. No, it's found all over the Bible. I will greatly rejoice in the Lord, Psalm 61:10. Notice it's not just I will rejoice, I will greatly rejoice. This is a joy that is so abundant that it's described by the word greatly. And my soul shall be joyful in, fill in the blank. My soul shall be joyful in my what? My who? My God. That's where true joy is found. And then notice this verse also connects the concepts of righteousness and rejoicing. They go together like two peas in a pod. So be glad then, the prophet Joel would say, ye children of Zion, rejoice in the Lord your God, and he'll send you the rain. He'll take care of you. And Habakkuk chapter 3, Habakkuk is confused at the beginning of the book. He doesn't understand why God would use the Babylonians to punish the people, though Habakkuk thinks the people certainly should be punished for their wickedness, but not by the Babylonians. The Chaldeans, they're more wicked perhaps than the people around me. How could you use them? And then the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him is not just a song for little children to be quiet in Bible class or worship. It's a concept of I will be humble and silent before the wisdom of my God and trust his judgment. And Habakkuk, by the end of the book, we go from sighing to singing. We go from an individual who's wondering to an individual who's rejoicing. Yet I will rejoice. Habakkuk, tell us where you're going to find this joy. In the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. Which brings us all the way back to the book where we started, Philippians chapter 3, even before you get to chapter 4, has the phrase, finally, my brethren, rejoice in the Lord. And then next chapter, my brethren, dearly beloved and longed for, my joy. Did you notice I've spotlighted the phrase, my brethren, my joy. My brethren, my joy. My brethren, my joy. Your joy is found in being together with your brothers and sisters in Christ here on the first day of the week, at foundations, at events like that. Every time we get a chance to be together, what a joy it is to be in the Lord together and to stand fast in the Lord and to encourage each other to be of the same mind in the Lord so that we have unity, as Philippians chapter 4 and verse 2 besought Euodias and Syntyche to have. And then you'll note the phrase, rejoice in the Lord. But that brings us to the third of 4 points, when. When should we? And this is where it gets challenging. Rejoice in the Lord always. Rejoice evermore. The Greek word, by the way, is the same exact Greek word in both passages here. You could translate it always. You could translate it evermore. Both are reliable translations of the word. But this is the concept. Rejoice in the Lord always. But someone says, surely not when times are tough. Brother Clarke, you don't know what I'm going through. And you know what? I don't know what some of you are going through, but I know what some of you are going through. You have someone very dear to you that you love who is sick, and you're very concerned, and it's weighing down on your heart. I know there are some who've lost loved ones and who are trying to navigate through life in a path they've never had to travel for years and decades, and now they're trying to find a way to navigate through it. There could be folks listening to me, for all I know, who could say, Brother Clarke, I went to the doctor this week and the doctor says it is cancer, it is aggressive, it is malignant, and we're going to have to treat it aggressively. And I'm supposed to rejoice always, evermore, in every circumstance. When I got married, I said I do, and my mate said I do too. But someone might say, my mate left me and left me shattered in heart. And now I don't know what I'm going to do or how I'm going to survive and raise my children alone and how I'm going to make ends meet. And I'm supposed to rejoice evermore and always. Do you not know that I just lost my job? Brother Clarke, my loved one didn't pass away. They didn't move away. They didn't walk away. They just don't know who I am anymore. Their mind has left them. And I try to be the best caregiver I can be. And they say some of the most hurtful things to me. But I know they don't even really know what they're saying. But those words coming out of that mouth that has always been so tender and kind, it's still a hard thing for me to hear, even though academically I know they're not really accountable for what they're saying, but I still hurt to hear it. And I'd do anything to bring back the mind of the one that is still alive, breathing, but who has no conscious knowledge of who I am. Rejoice always, evermore. BJ, when our children were small, we had them in every Bible class. We had them in all the worship services. They were at Christian camp, vacation Bible school, gospel meetings, home devotionals. We had every effort made that we knew how to make to teach and instill the Word of God in our young person's mind. And they grew up and met someone that didn't have that same background. And they have abandoned what we taught them to embrace someone who was not taught those things. And now our hearts are shattered and broken trying to figure out what happened. And is there any way to fix it? And I'm supposed to rejoice always. My loved one's in the military, and every time I hear the phone ring or a doorbell ring, I think, please don't let this be the call I've dreaded. Please, please don't let this be the news that I've dreaded. Brother Clarke, my loved one is addicted to substance, and I'd do anything if I could break the addiction for them, but I can't. They have to make the decision. And I watch them and I hurt to see what they're doing to themselves, their self-destructive way. But I'm powerless to do anything except pray for them. And yet I'm just so concerned about what's going to happen to them. Could I keep going? Yeah, I could. Because life is full of challenges and difficulties. And you know it was that way for the apostles in Acts 5. The Bible says after they were beaten, they departed from the presence of the council doing what? Whining and whimpering and saying, how could the Lord let this happen to us when we've been so faithful to Him? That's not what you read. You read that they, even though they were hurting, left that place rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for his name. And I remember that Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 6 wrote about how he was enduring, notice, afflictions. The word necessities in the King James there translated also can mean needs, his basic needs. Distresses, he was dealing with a lot of distress. Stripes, imprisonments, tumults, labors, watchings, sleepless nights, fastings, no food. He'd been treated dishonorably. Evil reports had been made about him. Dying at times, chastened. The same man that was going through all of that wrote this. As sorrowful, yet what? Paul, do you practice what you preach? You said, rejoice in the Lord always. You said, rejoice evermore. Do you? As sorrowful, yet always rejoicing. Why could he do that? He knew something. He possessed all things. And that's the blessing of a Christian. And I want to close out this message by looking at the how. How can we rejoice always? And fortunately, the answer's right there in the text of Philippians chapter 4. I want you to see embedded in that text what it tells us is available to you that will help you rejoice no matter what emotional pain you brought with you this morning. And you know, as a Foundations camp, we chose this theme this year because one of the nearest and dearest to our work over the years is Brother Philip Patton. And we're willing ourselves to not spend the entire week in grief, though we miss him so. We're willing ourselves to remember that even when life is not easy, when life is not a cupcake, when life is tough and hard, and sometimes we don't think we can make it another day, and the tears flow all the night long, as the song says, and we're weary emotionally, there is still a reason to rejoice. And I want you to see it in Philippians chapter 4, if you will, please. Notice verse 3. In the verse that comes right before the rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice verse 4, comes this verse, verse 3. I entreat thee also, true yokefellow, help those women which labored with me in the gospel, with Clement also, and with other my fellow laborers, whose names are where? Whose names are in the book of life. And what's the next word that you read is rejoice. Now, is that an accident? I want you to go to Luke 10 and remember the 70 disciples have been sent out on a mission, a limited commission, but nevertheless a mission from the Lord. When they get back, they're so joyful. We're told even why they're joyful. In Luke 10:17, the 70 returned again with joy. What's the basis of their joy? Lord, even the devils are subject unto us through thy name. And Jesus told them, yes, I know. I saw you exercise the power over Satan. I saw that. But notwithstanding, you'll notice in the verse on the screen, in this rejoice not, but rather rejoice. So he says, I don't want you to focus on this as your reason for joy, but here's your reason for rejoicing right here. So what does he tell them not to rejoice about? He says, rejoice not that the spirits are subject unto you. That's not the main thing to rejoice about, no. But rather rejoice. Here's Luke 10:20. Rejoice because your names are written in heaven. And what does Philippians chapter 4 verse 3 say? Whose names are in the book of life, rejoice. Those two verses side by side show us today that if your name's in the Lamb's book of life, you have something about which to rejoice no matter what else is going on in your life. And you know what? When we stand before the great white throne and we give an account for the things we've done, and the books are opened, and our conduct is evaluated by the books, and we are then determined whether we're in the book of life, then let me ask you, how big a deal is it to have your name in the book of life? Well, look at Revelation 20 and verse 15 and notice what happens if it's not there. Whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. Someone says, how did we get to hell in a sermon on rejoicing? Well, flip it. If my name not in the book of life means I'm going to be cast into the lake of fire, if my name is written there on the page white and fair, then I'm not going to be cast into the lake of fire. That leaves only one other location. I'm going to be with Jesus. I'm going to be with the Father. I'm going to be in heaven above, where there's no more sorrow, no more pain, no more tears, no more aches, no more chemo, no more cancer, no more ventilation tubes, no more anything that's bad. I tell you, that's what I want. And Revelation 3:5 says to the church at Sardis, now some of you haven't defiled your garments, there are few, but he says, I want you to know this. If you overcome, you can come over and live with me, as preachers have often said, but he says, I will not blot out his name out of the book of life. Now, a preacher that's passed on to his reward by the name of Guy, middle initial N, last name Woods. And the reason I'm explaining that is some years ago I was speaking at a congregation. I mentioned Guy and Woods, and a young person came up to me afterwards, totally sincere. They said, now, who is this guy in the woods you were talking about? I said, no. His name was Guy, middle initial N, last name Woods. Oh, okay. Brother Woods studied the Bible a lot. And he used to say this. He said there are 2,500 passages in the Bible that prove you could lose your salvation if you choose to. By the way, regarding that, I saw a poster when I was a young boy in the Sunday school hallway that's always stuck with me. It said, if you're not as close to God as you used to be, who moved? And that's really worth thinking about. If you're not as close to God as you used to be, who moved? He didn't. He didn't push you away and say, give me some space, please. He's never moved from where he is, but sometimes we drift away from him. And then we find ourselves dissatisfied and lacking in joy. That's certainly the case of David. And incidentally, before I leave this verse on the screen, I'll tell you why I often go to this when I'm talking to my religious friends and neighbors in Bible studies about whether you can lose your salvation. There's so many times we hear the following argument, well, if someone goes off and lives wickedly like that after they're saved, that just proves they were never what? They were never really saved to begin with, we're told. Well, wait a minute. There's a simple illustration in this verse that wrecks that. In order for a name to be blotted out of the book of life, it would first what? Who put it there? Who put it there? God's in charge of putting names in and taking names out. I'm not. I can make sure that my own name is put there by him if I obey his gospel, but I'm not in charge of taking other people's names in or out. God's business is that. So if a name ever made it into the book of life, are we saying God is going to look at it and say, oops, that's blasphemy? If God put it there, that's because they were saved, or he never would have put it there. But if he put it there and it means they're saved, what does it mean when he blots it out? It would mean they're lost. And so can you lose the joy of your salvation? Ask King David. David, You had such a good relationship with God, and then you saw Bathsheba and you just kept looking. If you just stumbled across the site and turned around and walked away, you wouldn't be in the mess that you're in. Your family wouldn't be in the mess that it's in. But David, you just kept gazing, and that led to this, which led to this, which led to this, which led to the murder of Uriah, her husband, which David, you're the man. The prophet told him, thou art the man. And so what did David write, with tears no doubt streaming down his cheeks as you see him writing the words, restore unto me. David, what do you want brought? I want joy. Restore to me the joy of thy salvation. Do you remember how great you felt the day you were baptized? Oh, I'm lighter than air. My sins are washed away. I've been redeemed by the blood of Christ. I'm in the church that belongs to Christ. And sometimes Satan finds a way to get back in and take the person that initially went on his way rejoicing, like the eunuch did in Acts 8:39. We don't know anything about the eunuch's Christian life after that, nothing. But we do know there was a man named Demas who no doubt went on his way rejoicing too after he was baptized. But what happened between the moment of his baptism and 2 Timothy 4:10? Demas hath forsaken me. What got him? Having loved this present world. What did Demas fall for? The same lie Satan's been telling since the Garden of Eden. There is a joy God won't let you have. And if you would just ignore God's prohibition to have it, you'd know what true joy and wisdom are all about. Why don't you have a little of this? Demas fell for that. Thought the world could give him what Christ couldn't. Don't fall for that lie, young people. Any people, don't fall for that lie. It's not true. So how can I overcome the troubles and trials of life and rejoice anyway, even in circumstances that aren't so pleasant? Next is realize his nearness. That's what verse 5 is all about. The Lord is at hand. Now, I disagree vehemently with commentators who say that verse means Paul erroneously thought the second coming of Christ was about to happen at any moment. No, he didn't. He wrote by inspiration of the Spirit, and he wouldn't have written down his false view, and the Spirit would not have superintended over the process and allowed false doctrine to be in the text as if it were true. When Paul said the Lord is at hand, here's kind of an expression from Jeremiah 23:23 that shows you how that could be understood. Am I a God at hand, saith the Lord, and not a God afar off? It's a rhetorical question that's answer is obvious. I'm close. I'm near. The Lord is nearby. I remember as a boy being sick. I'm not talking about taking a light bulb that's been turned on and is already hot and putting it to your forehead to get a fever. Sick. And I hope that didn't give anybody any ideas, but I'm not talking about that kind of sick. I'm talking really sick. My mom comes in, tucks me in, snug as a bug in a rug. You know how all that goes. Gives the castor oil or whatever that was she gave us at times that was supposed to be the cure. But then the most comforting medicine she gave me were these words, and it's true of my sister who's here today as well. If you need anything at all, I'm right here. I'm nearby. How comforting is it to have someone that loves you so much, so near? Lo, I am with you always. Jesus, in sending the apostles out on the Great Commission, reminded them of his nearness. I'll ever be with you, always be near to you. The Lord is my helper. What can man do to me? I will never leave you nor forsake you, Hebrews 13:5 and 6. The nearness of God. Do you ever go to one of those caves where they get you down into the depth of the cave, and they do what when they get you down into the depths of the cave? Turn the lights out. When they did that, our toddler was just getting his legs under him, and he didn't think it was funny. And so he starts shrieking and wailing. It's pitch dark. I had no trouble finding him. I just reached for the sound, the piercing sound. Picked him up, patting him on the back. It's okay. It's all right. I'm here. It's all right. It's okay. And even though it's still dark, the shrieks and the wails turn into whimpers and then start to subside and go away. Why? It's still dark. What made you shriek in the first place? It's still dark. But my Father has me in his arms. And if my Father's got me, I'm all right. And the third and next to last, how can I overcome trials and rejoice anyway? Remember to pray. Prayer is so powerful. In fact, the same Jesus who said in John 15:11, I've spoken these things to you that my joy might remain in you and that your joy might be full. In the very next chapter says what to them? He says, you need to ask and ye shall receive that your joy may be full. A joyful life and a prayerful life go hand in hand. And you'll note that that's what Paul says in Philippians 4:6, be careful for nothing. Now, what does the word be careful mean? It's translated here in the King James Version. I went to school with a guy who was very serious. He never joked around, never cracked a smile. He knew the Bible in many ways better than any of the rest of us Bible majors did. But we'd never get him to lighten up at all. One day we were leaving for the summer, and I said, well, you be careful on your trip home. And he says, the Bible says be careful for nothing. Oh, okay. I noticed he looked both ways before he crossed the street, by the way. So I don't think he was following that rule. What does it mean when it says be careful for nothing? Don't be full of cares or anxiety. In fact, the New King James Version talks about not having anxiety. Don't be full of anxiety. Don't be anxious. Why not? Turn it over to God. And then don't pick it up at the door as you leave the next morning and say, I've got to carry this burden. Turn it over to God in everything by prayer and supplication. Everything. Bring it all to him in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known unto God. I can pick up my cell phone and try to call world leaders and tell them what I think. I can't get a hold of them. I couldn't even get a hold of my state congressman when I lived in Mississippi to talk to him about something that was on my mind. I was always talking to a staff member that promised me they'd let him know. I never got to talk to him. It strikes me that I can talk right now, not to the world leaders. I can talk right now to someone far better. I can go to God in heaven and pray through Christ, and he will hear me. Think of the power in that. God will listen to me any time of the day or night. A CEO told his secretary, he says, you hold my calls, cancel my appointments. I've got this project deadline today. So the CEO has made his wishes known. The secretary shields him. Here's somebody that stops by just to see him. And she says, I'm sorry he's not available, but I'll tell him you came by. When would be a good time for him to schedule another visit with you? Someone calls, I'm sorry he's not available, but I'll tell him you called. When would be a good time for him to call you back? Tiny little knock at the door bolts him out of his executive business chair, and he speeds toward the door, opens it wide. He knows who's there. That little knock is recognizable. As he swings the door open, he looks down. There's his 3-year-old boy with his arms up like this. Pick me up, Daddy. He picks him up. He hugs him. Gives him fatherly kisses on the cheek. Says, I love you, son. I love you so much. You tell me how a 3-year-old could get into a man that multimillionaire bigwigs couldn't touch. How'd he do that? And you know how he did it. Sonship. That's my child. Friends, if you're God's child today, He is always available and He's ready to hear you. Pour your heart out to Him. He is there and He's available. No busy signals. And finally, friends, I can rejoice even when times are tough because I remember the happy ending. In the same passage in which Jesus told His apostles, I want you to rejoice, I want my joy to get in you and stay in you, He told them in the very next chapter, in the same conversation, you're going to weep and lament, but the world shall rejoice. You're going to be sorrowful. So what? I close with this. Many years ago, there was a young man at church where I preached in Knoxville, Tennessee, named Mike Savage. Not the radio commentator, but a young man named Mike Savage. He had a brother named Jeff. Working with them, they were restored to the faith. He was on fire. He came to me, he says, I want you to meet my girlfriend. I met her, studied with her, baptized her. He came to me one day, he says, hey, got 2 words for you. Getting married. Will you do the ceremony? I said, I'd love to do it. When he was 24, I preached his wedding. When he was 26, I preached his funeral. They'd misdiagnosed cancer as an infection, and by the time they discovered their misdiagnosis, it was too far gone for him to survive it. And I watched him wither away on his couch. He was one of the greatest athletes I'd ever seen, played ball with him, and was always in awe of his athletic feats. Watched him wither away on his couch, while at the same time Howard Stern was making headlines for signing a $100 million contract with satellite radio to be a shock jock, to say anything, any filthy thing that came into his mind and bless our airwaves with all the filth that he could think of. And he wouldn't be fined by the FCC because it was subscription radio. People were paying to hear it. And so while he's living in a mansion and having movies made about him and raking in millions, I'm watching a young man that loves God with all his heart withering away on his couch. And I must confess to you, it was messing with me. And I read John 16 one day, and I saw this, and I'd seen it before, but as Greg noted in Bible class, you can read the same passage over and over again. One day you see something, it's always been there, you just never saw it as prominently as you do this day. Your sorrow shall be turned into joy. Yeah, you're hurting. I'm hurting at times. But that sorrow is temporary. It's earthly. It's not eternal. I'm going to leave this world and its sorrows. A woman, when she's in travail, she has sorrow. And her hours come, but as soon as she's delivered of the child, even though this painful process of childbirth has really devastated her physically speaking, in the sense of just being so painful, for a moment, as she holds that child in her arms and looks at the face of the one who lived inside of her all those months and sees him or her for the very first time, she remembers no more the anguish. For what? For joy. The pain leads to joy. And friends, that's exactly the way it is with us. You now, therefore, may have sorrow. But Jesus says, I will see you again. Mark it down. I will see you again. Your heart shall rejoice, and that's a joy that no man can take from you. And so someday we get to hear these final words. Someday I hope we get to hear them. That's what we're here for, to live for this moment when We hear the Lord say to us, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I'll make thee ruler over many things." But here's the prominent phrase: "Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord." There is no better life than the Christian life, no life more joyful. Try it if you haven't already. If you tried it and you went on your way rejoicing when you left the waters of baptism, but sin and its consequences and its guilt are creeping deeper and deeper back into your heart, please boot that out right now. Come back to the joyous life of being forgiven and living in right relationship with God. The invitation song is about to be sung, and if you're missing out on eternal joy, this is your moment right now to get it, to grab a hold of it, lay hold on eternal life, and don't let go. As together we stand and as we sing, won't you please?